So, I think we're ready to begin. So, hello everyone. Hi, my name's Rich. This is my first ever talk, so thank you so much for being here to share in this moment. It's a really amazing talk so far. I've really loved the loads of chat that they've just had, and I'm going to be mentioning an awful lot of the things that they've just covered as well. So, let's just begin. First of all, welcome. Thank you for coming. You are all wonderful. So, my name is Rich Jackson, him. I'm a master's student of computing at Cardiff University, where I've been on placement for the past year with Nightingale HQ, or being a cloud software engineer. Hello, come on in. And so yes, so this entire talk is very much about this placement, this past 12 months that I've been in the sort of .NET space. Prior to that, I've been a professional musician for the past decade, which in terms of relevance for this talk is very much more about communication and education and, you know, in some manner performance, but I'm not really going to talk about that in this particular talk here. So exactly what we're going to be saying, talking about the .NET Azure communities and then specifically Umbraco over the past 6 months, what I've been doing and my experiences of my first job essentially, and also really focusing a lot on the soft skills for this rather than the technical. Again, I'm just not really in a point of authority to talk about more of the hard things, because ultimately this talk is about people, and it's about the people around the spaces. I increasingly feel that tech is about people. I feel AI is making tech even more about people and how we communicate and how we actually talk through things. This is one of the things that I feel that prompt in tech and, you know, prompt-based creation is going to really, really enforce further. So, this is my disclaimer. This talk is highly, highly subjective. It is just my personal experiences, and it really walks a fine line between just me talking about my stuff just for the sake of me hearing my own voice and actually being helpful. So that's just kind of a bit of a disclaimer. Any criticism, any comments that I've got, always meant constructively and with the greatest respect for a community that I'm genuinely in awe of every time I kind of have any sort of interactions with. So this is essentially the slide of I have opinions. I wanted to say a particular thank you to my Lord and Saviour Carl Saguna for putting me forward for this talk. It was basically his idea. We were sort of chatting and like, oh, you should do that. And so this is really his fault that I'm doing this, so I'd like to say thank you to him specifically. This is going to be in 2 parts. So part 1 is going to be experiences and part 2 is reflections. The background color of the slides will change, so you'll know about halfway through, and whether or not if you've particularly, like, you know, nodded off or gone to sleep. If it's looking in the more lilac way, then lunch is soon. So that is the real part that we've got to be aware of. So first half, experiences, what I've done for the past year, really. So back in 2021, September, I started the Masters in Computing. Again, this is a conversion course, so the nature of these things is that you have had a career progression or a life before, and then you see the light and you're like, I want to do something different. And in that case, for me, that's computing and kind of formalizing a lot of things I had slightly dipped my toes into before. Comes around to April of last year, and I realize I still don't have a placement, so I ask in the Cardiff Developer Slack channel if anyone has any placement opportunities, and a friend of mine gets in touch and says, yeah, I think we've got something, chuck us your CV. Month later, have an interview, and I'm offered a 12-month contract. So in terms of entry, that's kind of how I got involved in it. The startup specifically that I work for is called Nightingale HQ. It's a startup founded by Steph Locke and Ruth Kearney. Steph Locke's a relatively well-known data scientist, so typically when people I talk about Nightingale, they'll know Steph, now working for Microsoft. The primary things that we do are advising and assisting with digitalization in the manufacturing sector. That's just the notion that here are lots of physical processes. Here is a way we could help you use tech to streamline them, you know, efficiencies and so forth. Digitalizing, just making use of tech in what you do. And this kind of idea of manufacturing 4.0, which is kind of an interesting subtopic. Essentially what we do is create bespoke tooling for clients. So they'll say, we need this, and we'll make it for them, or we'll advise you to talk to. And one of the other sides that we actually do are what are referred to as digital reviews. So we'll go into companies and actually look at their infrastructure, look at their tech, look at just their processes, and go like, oh, there's an app for that, and actually just tell them which app it is. I mean, and this talk really isn't about Nightingale, it's an important bit of context that I've got to kind of highlight. Day to day, pretty much what I've said. So I'm working full-time, working from home in an office of a startup, so there's only 3 of us, developing using .NET, Azure, Power Platform, infrastructure as code, Bicep, process mapping using Visio, database creation, dashboard creation with Power BI, those kind of standard things, again, just for context. So, I'm going to quickly, this first section is really just going to be a quick overview of these kind of 3 core technologies that this talk is focusing on. So that's going to be the .NET framework, Azure, and Umbraco. So, it's important to be aware of what .NET is, just in case we don't have a clue for that. So an open source framework, which is maintained and created by Microsoft, allows for multi-platform development, so that we're able to write for a wide variety of operating systems. Typical languages it's going to be built with include C++, C#, F#, Visual Basic, and is then used for building many other frameworks and such like that, including ASP.NET Core, Blazor, and interestingly Unity, the game-making engine, because, and I think this is a relatively interesting point, for me, that was my first introduction to .NET and being aware of .NET. And I think it's one of those parts when we think about adoption, how you first hear about .NET for the first time. Now that I am within the .NET space, everybody seems to obviously know about it, but it's a huge core part of businesses. But prior to that, I, from the outside, no visibility personally, except for through Unity. And in fact, one of the interesting parts was when I was first in talks about getting this job, one of my central prerogatives was, oh, I can get better at C#, so I can get better at game dev. And so again, when thinking about attractions for the .NET space, I actually think Unity is quite an interesting one. Here's just a couple of projects I've done. So Flappy Dragon, which is like Flappy Birds, but with a dragon, because dragons are better than birds. And Manuscript, which is a music education app, so I make like little apps like that. Which is really weirdly, there's some American musicians who are trying to recreate that and keep sending me all these really obscure, lead specific questions. And I just haven't had a moment to just make it again. But yeah, so it's literally an app where there's a treble clef and a bass clef, and you just go up and down and it'll play that note and show you what it is. Anyway, within the company, within sort of the actual work I've been doing, so this is again a whistle-stop tour of what I have done in my first year. Building, maintaining web APIs, we're using Azure Functions for that, making admin panels using sort of Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor WASM kind of things, again, the kind of what's referred to as the static web apps and serverless, etc. You know, that whole kind of world. Database migrations, helping from on-prem to cloud, you know, unit testing, XUnit, and data handling with Entity Framework. And again, I'm not really listing these things as if this is news to anyone, but it's kind of also for my own reflection that these are, at the first year of me having worked in this, are my core touchstones of what I associate with the work that I'm doing at present. It would be really interesting to revisit this in a year and kind of look back and see how things have changed. Anyway, Azure being Microsoft's cloud platform, one of the top 3 cloud platforms that I'm aware of currently. It's a cloud infrastructure, so it allows us to create solutions and any sort of tooling at the infrastructure platform or software levels. Its potential is absolutely vast. It's so impressive to learn about and to hear about in terms of what is possible. Because I think that's actually one of the really interesting problems that I first had when learning, when doing, say, my first Azure Microsoft qualification, the AZ900, was, oh wow, I'm reading in this book about I can create all of these VMs and I can do all of these amazing and magical things, and then I sit down with a portal and nothing works and everything is an error message. And I want to make stuff in UK West because that's in South Wales, but there are like no SKUs of anything to actually make it, so everything now has to be UK South. This is the thing, there's so many ways of using Azure and it's so powerful, but the user the initial user experience is, in my humble opinion, like really, really poor in terms of the number of things which are erroring, in terms of the number of things which are obfuscated and hidden away, and the accidental costings, which we'll absolutely talk about, because here is my budget alert for the fact that I spent $282 on a budget of £1, and I just love exceeding your specified threshold of 1 cent, which I always particularly love. This was from, I think, creating some premium storage account, and I just messaged over to Azure support, going like, and they were like, oh, we see there's literally no traffic and you clearly just made it, so yeah, we'll just write that off. So again, just wanted to say thank you to Azure for that. So showing that they're clearly aware that it's so easy to spend money and that they've got the threshold for just casually writing off $300 worth of stuff. What an age. Within this first 12 months, I've basically gone ham on qualifications. I've basically gone, I want to learn a bunch of stuff and I want to have a framework for learning, and so I am going to go from a goal-based method. I'm going to specifically try for qualifications. I was initially asked when I started the job to get the Azure Fundamentals, which is AZ 900, and then optionally a couple of others, and then I just kind of got addicted to it in terms of, here is a new infrastructure, here is a new world, what's the best way that I can get a high-level overview of those kind of things? And for me, the qualification route felt like the most correct and proper, because that was, a Microsoft-led, this is what they think you should learn, so that feels like a good starting point. Over the past 6 months, I've actually done some of the associate level exams, which were crazy hard for the level I was at, and I do not recommend, unless you don't like sleeping, in which case go for it. And again, those are brilliant qualifications. One of the problems and one of the acknowledgements I have of my own learning is that I learned for the exams, but I couldn't make or build the things that I've learned about. I'm aware of them in theory, I've answered an exam going through these questions, but I haven't myself necessarily made this code, actually put together these, what I feel is more deserving of these kind of things. I think there's kind of an issue as well, especially with Azure Administrator, of learning about how to do something versus actually having done it in practice. There's the kind of quandary or paradox of bar work or bar experience of like, if you want to work in a bar, you need to have bar experience. So to get the bar experience, you need bar work kind of thing. And one of my favorite YouTube videos of like advice on how to pass the Azure Administrator is like, yeah, so I spent like, 2-3 hours a night working on this, and I was working for 9 to 5 as an Azure Administrator. And I was like, okay, that is not very helpful. But when we're talking about, say, creating express routes and when to make sure that we've got the correct levels of locking on it so that someone doesn't accidentally delete this stuff, I'm not going to have the actual experience of doing that, and it's very hard for me to do that. Thus, I can only have this conceptual notion of it, at least at the level I'm at. So I think qualifications are a really, really good way, just with a pinch of salt of what you actually get. And then over the past 6 months, I've been involved in the Umbraco space. And I will be the first to admit that I don't feel that I have used Umbraco as much as I would like to. But what I have done is engaged with the community, which I think is a thing of wonder and should be a good hallmark for other people if they're looking at their technologies and they're looking at their own communities. Again, topics that were covered earlier in Eli's chat. So Umbraco, the friendly CMS, Hudson Moore coined that in 2006. I believe he's one of the original developers or designers for it. For all intents and purposes, CMS, it's a web content manager built on .NET. It's basically a large ASP.NET Core project. The reason that I heard about it was word of mouth. Basically, the people I respected this. My manager, who's typically quite cagey about particularly wanting to recommend, is like, oh, I love Umbraco. And then I'd come to events like this, and I'd meet people like Carl Saguna, who'd be like, oh yeah, I love Umbraco and stuff like that. And again, word of mouth recommendations. That's why I kind of stuck with or being interested in it. As a side note, we're looking to migrate our own. And so, in my decision to start learning it on January 12th, I decided to start a Twitter thread going through here is my experience, because again, my initial onboarding experience was poor. I really struggled with anything. I kind of still do, to be honest with you, but I felt there are odd little things. For example, the documentation, they have their old style documentation, and then they have the new documentation, and in the old documentation, that's what Google will always link you to, and there'll just be a thing at the top that goes like, you probably want the new documentation. It's like, and they are aware of this, they're aware it's a problem, but ultimately it's again a barrier for entry, unnecessary noise in the actual like onboarding experience. But I decided to be proactive about these difficulties, and I started making pull requests. I started making actual changes to the documentation, and like within the first week, I actually corrected something. And what I really appreciated was the level of support and gratitude expressed throughout that community, through Twitter, on GitHub as well. It's nice when you have responses with emojis in them. In a positive way. I hate negative emojis. Or sarcastic emojis, they're the worst. You need to know the person before you do that. That's a different thing. But yeah, and so I ended up putting together documentation stuff, and that was really lovely. And then I also started my own Umbraco blog, talking about the issues I was having with putting together an Umbraco blog. And so just sort of, and I call it Catalogue of Errors. I really haven't done an awful lot with it, but the concept's there. I want to have it as a reference of the issues that I found, so that other people can be alleviated from such concerns. One of the key problems I have is the issues with deployment. I found that quite difficult. And that was really nice, because that particular blog article then inspired Seb, who is the developer and advocate at Umbraco, and like super lovely guy, to run his own cool, I'm going to try and host an Umbraco site for a month for free then. And I was like, oh, that's really good. Yeah, your blog post was my direct inspiration. And it's again really lovely to have those interactions where you can see a tangible, it's kind of using your pain, I guess. It's like, this is the suffering that I had, so that other people don't have to. And then, rather than just deleting it and moving on with your life, to try and be constructive and then have that picked up. Again, we're talking about feedback, and actually having these things listened and heard is so valuable. So again, in terms of the Umbraco, like I said, onboarding I thought was really difficult. One of the key issues that I felt with Umbraco, and I feel this is one of those issues, we're kind of, there's a question toward the end of Eli's chat just earlier, where it's kind of, there's an issue between JetBrains Rider and between Microsoft Visual Studio, so who owns that problem? And with Umbraco, because it's built on ASP.NET Core, when I'm learning, I don't know if my problem, at what level, I don't know what level my problem is. Is it an Umbraco problem, an ASP problem, a C# problem? You know, because again, I'm learning, it's really hard for me to know where these problems are. So with any onboarding, there really needs to be strong assessment of the first time user, especially the first 10 minutes. I'm really stuck with Umbraco because of word of mouth. It was, as I said, respected by people, so I was like, you know what, fine, I'm going to stick with this. I would not have otherwise, absolutely not. Yeah, and you know, I think one of the best things that new users can do, correct documentation. Worst thing you can do is to make a statement which ends up being wrong, and then you learn because someone's corrected it, because they have a really good documentation team. Shout outs to Sophie, who is the queen of docs there. They also run Umbraco Spark, which is a lovely event, which we'll chat about in a second. This is more or less the same. This is basically what I've just been talking about, the sort of issues that I particularly found and how I feel that they could definitely alleviate these things. I'm obsessed with that new user experience, and I just felt it was quite poor. So when there was Umbraco Spark, which was this conference in Bristol, they involved an actual, I'm going to the next slide for that. I'm going to fail to go to the next slide for that. They held a hackathon, which really helped to kind of promote making changes. And so mine was really focused on document pull requests. I just think more people should do them in general. And something I was very surprised about on Twitter was when I was saying, I've made this pull request. Loads of people go, wow, I love your energy, you know, you're just starting off and you've made your first pull. It's like, you could just like remove a full stop or like just help with the grammar or just anything like that. It still helps because, you know, as we'll cover in excessive detail, documentation is good. Here's Umbraco Spark. Noticeably, here's my favorite IO, Aaron. And so this is the kind of, you know, those sort of code jam events. This was the day before the official conference, so it'd be the equivalent of if yesterday everyone had gathered around to try and improve .NET, you know, it's that kind of thing. And I think having those hackathon style events in conjunction with a formal conference is also just a really nice way to get involved. Ice break the day before, so the next day you can all actually enjoy the conference together. And while I'll talk about conferences shortly, the opportunity to meet and mingle with the people directly involved in making the software that you are struggling with, so that you can just send them a LinkedIn message, a message on your choice of social media, or email, who knows. And they'll just be there and super, super helpful because they want to hear from you again. Umbraco are really an example of open source community building, and if you want to talk to them, talk to the people involved. Here is a bit of me talking about meetups and conferences. Here is a photo of Eli from about an hour ago. Because it's really, really invaluable to stress when you have just entered a community, being aware of the kind of events that are there. So for example, as a musician, we're talking concerts, we're talking, well, we're talking open mics, we're talking concerts, we're talking occasional networking things, but not much. In tech, meetups and conferences, so many of them, and they're brilliant, again in terms of people, and in terms of actually having an opportunity to interact, especially for what is typically a predominantly digital media. The actual people element of it is so wonderful. New perspectives, word of mouth recommendations, something I talked about in the blurb was, you know, how you get other people to try out your software. It's like word of mouth, and people will sort of mention, oh, I tried out this tool, it was really good. Oh, have you found this issue? People debugging issues in the Q&A section of certain people's talks. An opportunity, again, and most importantly, by far, free food. So much free food, my God, it's so good. Shout outs to .NET South West and the Cardiff groups as well. Shout outs to IO in general for being wonderful and supporting these kind of events. These are just lovely to have these semi-regular, well, in this case monthly, times that you can gather together. Especially as someone who's working remotely, this is kind of the most physical interaction with actual developers I was able to get. Hilariously, I won a JetBrains license on my first session, which is lovely. Welsh Azure user groups for anyone who's interested in learning more about Azure, online every month, super lovely, consistent, there's a quiz at the end, you know, all these kind of things, these things exist. I attended loads and loads of conferences, they were generally absolutely wonderful. But the relevant point for this, rather than just like trying to show off about conferences or whatever, I spoke to somebody who was, again, a junior developer, who said, like, basically, within his company, it would be the managers who would go to the conferences and then would come back and sort of tell the underlings about what they'd learned. And that felt so incorrect to me. So again, the advice of this from my own experiences is to push to go to as many conferences and events as possible, as early as possible. Like, we'll talk about the crazy width of the tech industry at large, but just in terms of perspective and always being surprised that there is more. There is no greater thing for a conference. As a small thing, I wanted to give an award for my favourite conference talk of the year so far, in the hopes that I end up doing this every year and I want to make a formal thing. But my favourite talk absolutely was Laura Weatherhead's The Compassionate Developer in Open Source. So this was a talk that she gave at Umbraco Spark, and it's focused on compassion and its place in the technical world. And it was just a brilliant, brilliant talk. If you happen to be going to Code Garden, which is the Umbraco large conference in Denmark on 14th to 16th of June. The Laura is actually doing an extended version of that, and she promises me that will actually be recorded. Well, she doesn't promise, she hopes that it will be recorded. But again, I just wanted to acknowledge that talk, because a lot of what we're going to be chatting about now is more like softer skills stuff and compassion. All right, so this is the end of part one. I'm vigilant that it's going to be lunch, so normally there'd be a little bit of a break so people can actually think, but we're just going to continue so that we can have food. Are there any sort of questions so far, or anything you'd like me to talk about? Yeah, please.
Just a quick one. Do you have a rough idea how much time you spend on all those existing qualifications? How much time do you spend studying during the year?
Yeah, what a great question. The first one I did way too early. I was told you could do it in like a week, but I hadn't had any Azure experience before, so then I saw the size of the textbook and freaked out. So that was like, what, 3-4 hours a day for a week, because I booked it by accident, and I just happened to, I wasn't actually working at the time, it was the gap between. Yeah, I don't have a good number for you in terms of that. I would say for like the 2-star, the associate level ones, you know, that's about 3 or 4 hours a day for a couple of months. But again, I definitely felt I approached those exams too early on in my career. It's nice to have done, but when they say you should have done a year or 2 years of experience before, I do agree with that. For the fundamentals qualifications, I don't know, like what, 20 hours, 30 hours overall? They're not quite as large. I'll talk through some of the resources that I think are really good for that as well, because that's the other side. When you're starting off with qualifications, you don't know what's going to be the source of material that resonates for you. For example, if you want to know anything Azure related, especially about the qualifications, the John Saville Technical Training YouTube series with John Saville is like the best YouTube-based source. But now I know that it's really easy. At the beginning, I had no idea. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. It's also really helpful what you said about like, when to do the training, rather than jumping in if you're completely new, get some experience first. How
100%.
Did it ever fail to meet the actual system?
No.
That's actually I've tried 3 times to do it now. Every time there's been a technical problem, so we've been put off.
Fair. I'm going to speed through this because, but yeah, thank you. All right, cool. So, first job perspectives. One of the interesting things was that when I started off this job, and I think this is, again, I'm walking the line between stuff which feels obvious and stuff which you might not, that other people won't quite appreciate. But the idea that what I had used before was still being used, but with a slightly different skin. So for example, instead of using VS Code, it was like, okay, now we use Visual Studio for this, or instead of using GitHub for our version control, we're going to use Azure DevOps, Slack. You know, these are standard things, but again, when we talk about how vast tech is and what to learn, it's really important, I feel, to acknowledge the fundamentals don't really change a huge amount. It's more or less what's built on that. Mistakes I made, wanting to take on too much. I think that's just an eagerness thing of a new job. You know, it's like, I'm going to do everything, and then literally not being able to. And yeah, these kind of things. Overcomplicating stuff. I have an obsession with artificial complexity and the reasons that people make stuff too hard for themselves, such as not communicating blockers, going like, no, I'm going to sort this out, I'm going to take this on for myself, which is kind of tying into this idea of dev pride. How proud people are of the work they do and how difficult it can be to criticize or to do that. And especially when I start, the levels to which is like, see this class I have made, and I'm like, oh, that's fab, okay, let's refactor it to within like an inch of its life. And that being obviously helpful, but also quite soul destroying to begin with. And you know, you are not your work. Really having that appreciation that criticisms for your work isn't criticism of you specifically. Just, again, these could be obvious, but I feel bear repeating. And especially when you are starting off, and these are things that I personally found. Working from home. So this is quite, this is a very individual experience. And it's just to highlight my first experiences of working from home. is that it's entirely self-motivating and trust. Like, if you can get yourself to do these work, and if you are in an environment where you are given trust, and when you earn that trust, then it's incredible and wonderful, but it doesn't work without those things. Flexible working hours, again, that's brilliant for, well, me. It's brilliant for many, many people. What I personally found as being a huge problem was isolation. As working for a startup and actually just living on my own as well, my only other human contact would be 2 people remotely on a screen, one of whom, if he couldn't leave his room, he just would be happy, and then the other one who's in Ireland. So what I ended up actually doing was pretty much just finding social things to do outside of work. I actually, in the past month or so, joined a wild swimming group, so now every morning I jump in the sea with other people who jump in the sea. So, but that fulfills that particular part. Prior to that, the isolation was so bad that was a real factor for me in terms of even wanting to stay at this company, where I'd have, I didn't have many issues, but the lack of people was a problem for me. Again, hugely personal slide. This is a hugely personal talk, so I just wanted to at least raise that's something I found. And that one of the nice things is that I raised the problems I was having with the company, and so okay, so what we can try and do to support that is we're going to try and get a shared working space, and in Cardiff, probably Tramshed Tech, and go down there on the Wednesday, just being heard in terms of what my concerns are, kind of leading into different points, which is the retention stuff. So I was absolutely going to quit. There were some issues here, and I decided to stay on for a little while. And in terms of retention, my only kind of advice. It's 12:30, man. Right. My only kind of advice in terms of retention for people who want to retain people, and those who are also considering leaving, etc. Open communication. Communication of goals. Make sure that actually you know what you're trying to get out of your job, and recognizing what are the problems with stagnation, whether or not those are particularly obvious or could even be shifted and changed. Discourse, actually just chatting, again, communication is going to be a big section in a second. Talking about mutual benefit, being very, very open, I would like to do the following things because they will help me in my career for X, Y, and Z reasons, and in the doing so, this will help the company in such reasons. Again, I can only speak from the perspective of startups, where it's literally you and 2 other people, and so these are far more negotiable than in larger companies. I fully accept that that's not going to be applicable for anyone, and the fact that there is always room for growth. Last thing I particularly took away from just sort of the first bit of work is that everyone in tech is obsessed with coffee all the time, except if you're in Yorkshire. Someone on Twitter decided to make sure that I was aware that that's not the case for Yorkshire, so I'd like to apologise to Yorkshire specifically. Anyway, all right. Education and support. Learning new technologies. Advice for people, especially when they're starting off, because it can be huge and terrifying, is just to continue being curious. Curiosity is the greatest thing ever. Find what works for you individually and really embrace that, but also explore different ideas, things that might not be so obvious, but might end up actually working. Qualifications, I've talked about that enough, but I think it's a good way of kind of just focusing all right, well, I don't really feel motivated, so I'm going to enter this crazy hard exam in a month and we'll see how we go. It's motivation gets you actually doing stuff. And I think find people you are comfortable asking questions to is really underrated. This is again one of the real joys of these events, is that there are so many experts in so many fields, so many people's deep knowledge does not match up with your own. And just having these little interactions means that you're more likely to get a reply if you go hi, how does this work? These conferences are brilliant for that. Learning materials, my favourites. Microsoft Learn, I think, is really, really lovely. It's really, really good, especially in the kind of space we're talking about, so .NET, Azure. But the one caveat for Microsoft Learn is that for the actual Microsoft Learn course and stuff like that, those aren't all open sourced to my knowledge, and you can't make pull requests to changing of them. You can do for all of the documentation, so for any of the actual the docs themselves, the official docs, but to the best of my knowledge, you can't change the Microsoft Learn stuff. which was really, really annoying because I kept finding mistakes or just had issues, and I really wanted to give feedback, but that barrier of entry to me giving said feedback means the mistake is still there to this day. If I'm wrong, brilliant. I'd love to be wrong because that annoys me so much. O'Reilly Learning, fabulous. O'Reilly, is just the greatest place ever. If you can get an O'Reilly Learning subscription, and you get access to everything, and it's amazing. LinkedIn Learning is also pretty great. I think it's lovely. Really underrated, really good quality of videos, really good quality material. YouTube, YouTube, if you've heard of it, it's the thing. Books, I just still think books are relevant. I will fight that till my dying day. God bless books. Because I think it's really lovely to just have those tactile objects that you can just skim through. They're really good for learning stuff you didn't realize you needed to learn. So much about online learning can be driven by your own biases, what you're interested in at that moment. And I feel books books are good is the kind of idea here, but you will find all of these and you'll be forced to kind of read and interact with these parts that you're like, oh, why did they include a chapter on this? I didn't realize this mattered, and wow, it's the life-changing thing. If you're doing exams, past papers, brilliant. Places like Measure Up or With Labs. I was saying to somebody on Twitter that I was really struggling with some exams. So some kind soul sent me over their lifetime subscription to account and password for With Labs. So now I have access to that. So share your pain, everyone, is kind of what I'm saying. Weaknesses, so we just have to be aware that if you're just going off documentation, you can't have a follow-up chat if it's purely just I'm reading a book or if I'm doing this course. Again, this is why communication and actually knowing who to ask is a really good thing. And being able to actually just communicate directly to the author themselves, really underrated. So pretty much every author I've spoken to or have asked a question has given me a really good response because they care, because they wrote a book and writing a book's hard. One thing I will highlight from being a former music educator is if you have, say, a simple problem and then you send someone away to go sort it out and they bring you back the most complicated possible answer, that's the artificial complexity that you have to beware, because it's oh no, there is no way any of this stuff is relevant. I mean, well done for looking at it, but the answer's one. That's it. So guided learning materials are really, really invaluable for that. And you always have to check what version the actual documentation is talking about, because software changes. Who knew? Moving targets of learning. Tech is ever changing, and it's incredibly difficult. Well, I have found it, again, this is entirely subjective, very, very hard to decide what is relevant. And then if I'm learning one thing, it's this is just going to change in a month. Why am I bothering to learn that? But ultimately, fundamentals absolutely stay the same. And that only becomes more apparent. The more you know, the more you realize there's a couple of key rules which just permeate everything, as long as you are fully aware of those. I don't know what those are, but I know they're there. I'm going to find them and I'll tell you about it next year. And just appreciating that you'll never know everything. Again, I think the better, curiosity is the best thing you can have in terms of learning, and just accepting that you can always ask questions and that other people have done this stuff first. Last section of this before we go for lunch. Assumptions and documentation and all of that good stuff. Yeah, we need to document stuff, and especially the quote-unquote obvious stuff, because that doesn't exist, and it's about especially explaining to anybody who isn't in that software, trying to explain anything to, say, stakeholders, the people who actually fund your project. This is the stuff when documentation and getting into good habits of writing it are invaluable, right? So, this is a Peter Yang tweet as well, I should probably credit these things more. Communication, lovely definition, is just being able to express your intent and meaning clearly. I'm really, really passionate about communication. I generally think it's so, so important, and from my own personal experiences, I feel it's an area that the tech industry at large could improve. It's something which can be actively focused upon, actually worked on as a skill, I'm doing that right now. This is me trying to get better at this style of communication. The aforementioned, this is my first talk. This is me trying to do the things that I'm talking about. Communication, good communication has no bad sides. You know, there is no way that being a bad communicator will ever be good unless there's some ultra niche misunderstanding which turns out, you know, like, it's always going to be supporting, actually being constructive, making sure that you know what I'm talking about. And so we can develop empathy, which is for you to be able to resonate with my kind of feelings. We're going to come to empathy in a bit. One of the conference, in fact, at PyCon, do you remember Chris Laffra of the, he's at JP Morgan stall? Anyway, so he like handed me this book. Oh yeah, I'm really passionate about communication. And I went on this whole spiel about why I thought it was brilliant. It's like, cool, well I wrote it, so fab. So it's nice when you sell someone their own book. I feel that's always an appropriate thing. I just think this is a wonderful book, to the point of even remembering to bring it for this conference, to hold up right now. But if you ever needed any sort of guidance of how tech-specific situations could be improved through communication, or even just through complimenting. There's a section on how to compliment people and ways of being specific with your compliments, which if we're talking about our users or we're talking about our stakeholders, you know, I'm not just talking about documentation, I'm talking about actual people. This stuff is just so important. So that's something I've noticed. I just think it's a really, really big area that improvements can be made. Quickly, because I think it's worth actually highlighting the definition of empathy and the definition of compassion and the differences between them, because I think it's very, very useful to be aware of. Empathy is understanding somebody else's perspective, but compassion is actually wanting to help them out of that situation. There is the clear path from communication to empathy to compassion is what my friend Laura's talk about the compassionate developer was all about, and it was really revelatory for me. I really can't speak highly enough of it. But again, the best support is always going to be informed by compassion. Understanding where you're coming from and actually feeling like it would be a good thing for you to do to help them out of that. Quick unsolicited advice about how to ask things to people. Politeness and specificity. Just be polite, just be nice, just be specific. The vagueness of the questions that I hear is amazing to me, because there's the lack of empathy of going, you understand concept A, B, and C, and them having no actual comprehension of that, but there's an assumption that they do. And again, going back to dev pride, people get really, really like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and like, there is this. I've been in meetings where, and as you may all have, but there's been in meetings where sort of like we've told somebody to do X, Y, and Z, but I know that we haven't given them enough information, but they've been too proud to actually ask us anything. And the next day we get the email back and like, oh, this didn't work because, and it's like, oh, I can see where they've messed up. And I'm like screaming like, yes, of course, there's no way they could have done that. We didn't provide them enough information and they didn't ask. It's a two-way street. I'm blaming both in as much as I'm blaming neither. So context, understanding that not everyone, well, just having baselines of appreciation that other people don't quite understand this stuff. Avoid artificial complexity. Don't make life really, really difficult. Again, that comes with knowledge and wisdom and insight, because you don't know how hard something is. That's why you ask people, that's why you communicate. And read your error messages carefully. I don't do this enough, and that causes the 90% of my problems. Again, kind of just the flipping on in terms of nice advice. Just if someone's answering, I think this is all relatively the same as what I've just spoken about. But of all the things from my own experience, taking the time to answer properly and managing the expectations are like the two best things that you can do as being a more senior developer to help a new developer. It's so easy to, let me rephrase that. I would love to, I'm messing this up horribly. Point being, it can be really easy to just rush off an answer like, oh, you just do this. But that can be really terse, it can almost be hurtful as well if you just kind of brush it, like just giving some quick response thing. If you just say, I'm in the middle of something right now, I'll get back to you, like in an hour, manage the expectations of when you're going to do it, and then actually sit down to go through it properly. The number of, oh, it's just that, or just look here, or just try this, without it, because there's just been a quick message while the team lead or whatever is in a meeting. It's so invaluable to just kind of say, I will get back to you before lunch, or go grab a coffee, I will be there, but not right now, to just make people aware of. Again, it comes down to communication. A kind of slightly strange tangential slide here, but something I've also noticed, something I've definitely noticed is the way that lots of managers end up in teaching roles, especially in tech. The higher up you are basically, it's assumed that you're going to teach people how to do stuff. Companies obviously have dedicated academies, and that's wonderful and great, but even in those situations, it certainly feels that there is always this kind of expected teaching role. You must then teach the lower. And I would only be vigilant of the fact that I'm unsure how many people within computer science actually have teaching training, actually focus on it, because it's part of the culture, it's ingrained, I'm not saying it's a problem, I think it's really good for a whole bunch of things, if it's done well. And so my experience would tell me that a little more focus on actual teacher training internally, trainer kind of programs, etc., can be really helpful, because those experiences can be very destructive emotionally. Like, a bad teacher can put you off entirely. And again, when we're talking about retention and positive environments, I feel that teaching is quite a good one for that. Necessity for good examples. In general, it's easier to criticize something, say, oh, this is rubbish, than to say, this is really good. In your talk, Matt, I asked about where's a good example of doing a particular programming style, which I've literally forgotten, and you're like, oh, just look at this repo. This is a really good, really clean example of this. And I actually find that just very clear cut, oh yeah, just check this out, this will tell you everything, is quite rare and really important. Especially for people who don't know what they're talking about, which is me. I need to have an example of something so I can follow that. Anyone can go, oh, that's rubbish, oh, you tried that language, oh, it's terrible, etc., without extolling the virtues of it. And to that point then, house styles, guidance, linting tools, style cop and stuff like that, that kind of tooling is also incredibly important. Quick guess, anyone know what this building is? Cool, it's a library in San Francisco. Right, cool. Anyway, so last kind of slides. What's next for me? Doing my dissertation, that'll start off in about July. I've accepted the role with Nightingale, I'll be moving forward. I'm wanting to improve my own skill set so I can help out other community things and art projects and musicians and stuff like that. The kind of end goal is to be a digital consultant for artists. And I'm releasing an EP next Friday, so come and check that out, yay! Woo. All right, so final thoughts. And then lunch, yay, the best part of the day, except for breakfast. Right. In general, I don't feel the onboarding experience in pretty much any of the tech stacks I've dealt with or talked about today is sufficient for new users. It was really interesting for me just yesterday. I was trying out some minimal API stuff, and there was this snippet of ASP, and I was like, cool, all right, here we go. And so copy and paste that and blah, blah. And it didn't work, and I was sort of sat there this is literally just a web server, I'm literally just making a call request to it, what's going on? And it's because they didn't have app.start at the end of it, right? And this is super obvious for anyone who knows it's obvious, but for anyone who has no idea what they're doing and there's just a snippet, it needs to be self-contained. And it's such a weird example. It's just yesterday, and how is this a thing? It's again about appreciating your own assumptions and empathizing with other people's positions of knowledge, which will be so different and distinct and beautiful and wonderful. That's the whole point of life. Connecting with the community is essential. Absolutely, nothing happens in isolation. And I think there are so many beautiful opportunities for interaction, DDD being one of my favorite, mainly because, again, the lunch buffet is so good if it's the same as last year. Communication. Invest in communication, same with in education. Actively try and improve your own educational experience. Eli was so kind and would actually asked if I would want any feedback after this in terms of this presentation. And that's so wonderful to have the community organically try and improve itself. It becomes self-perpetuating in terms of support, which is why I think these events are brilliant. Like, educational skills shouldn't be assumed. People get put in positions they shouldn't be in, like basically, and especially looking after people. It's, you know, the whole ascension then meaning you have to teach. Yeah, that's a whole thing. And try to be aware of what you think is obvious. Final slide, well, final 3 slides. Tech is hard.
Can I get a photo of that one?
Absolutely.
Yeah, just so I can share it with people and show
Yeah, for sure.
To the stuff that really matters.
So I'm going to talk like I know what I'm actually expressing right now. It's a really good point, but ultimately tech is, you know, pretty difficult, and ultimately be excellent to each other. And thank you for listening. Thank you. It means a lot to me of the UK and share your time with me today. Are there any questions? Yes, please.
Another question. Is there totally feedback on the site? Very top.
Oh, cool, great, cool. Beautiful. Okay, cool, fabulous. I will absolutely do that. Cool. You can feedback online. It's just, I think I was more just looking for a pull request specifically, but yes, thank you. I do appreciate that. Cool. Any other questions or immediate criticisms? Or corrections? Yes, please. Sorry.
Are there other technologies where you felt that the onboarding has been better that you've used not as part of what you've covered today?
What a great question. I don't know what.
Don't say Python.
I'm fishing for it. What did you say?
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Having said about the importance of good examples, I don't think I do have a good example for that. I will get back to you. What good? Yeah, because even Python and stuff, I feel the onboarding could be improved in terms of just installation stuff and version issues and how I install this version and why my particular terminal isn't working with this version. Why am I still on 3.10? I swear I installed 3.11 in every place under the sun. Yeah, I actually don't have a good. What an obvious own goal about talking about how important it is to have good examples and not to have considered this. Thank you. Yes, please.
Just addressing you think about questions, I think it's always important never to be afraid to ask the obvious questions, because that's when things can go badly wrong if people don't ask them. And equally, for the more senior people, should never make people feel afraid of asking the obvious questions.
So much of it's about culture, isn't it? So much of it's about encouraging these questions, never looking down on it, creating a safe space for doing so. And it is funny to me, again, it sort of ties in to what I was saying about everyone is an NHS project and everyone's saying that everyone has the, like, oh, and this is how the NHS does it, and like 10 different people saying this is how the NHS does it in different ways. I've spoken to quite a few who have been made to feel bad for asking these questions, and that is terrible to me, and so I hope I don't hear about that an awful lot. But yes, you're absolutely correct. Thank you.
I think that's quite a key. Sorry,
Please.
jumping in. I think that's quite a key thing, because, and back to the thing that tech is hard. It's so broad that you can be really, really experienced in one field. If you step into another, you know nothing, and you are right at the bottom, and somebody could, you know, be quite derogatory to you. Your knowledge or your logic skills or something are, you know, immense.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing, like, it's very easy to kind of make light of that, like, oh, look who's coming for help, you know, that kind of like quote-unquote banter, but like, is it helpful? Is it really actually good? Is it as funny as you think you are, kind of stuff? And that's exactly the problem. Thank you, that's a really good, because I'm obviously not as an experienced developer, that's not necessarily my most obvious thing, so thank you for bringing that, appreciate it. This question,
So, already asked one. On the slide balance, monitoring question, you said manage expectations. So is that specifically about when I can get back to you, or how much I can help you, or what are you thinking about?
all of those things. What I don't like is like 3-word responses that are just rushed and don't mean anything and actually make you regret asking. So in terms of those expectations, yeah, you can be as broad as you like. I wasn't specifically meaning that, but you're absolutely correct. how much will this actually help you? How much work is then expected of you? If I'm sending you an example, how much of that will it sort out for you? How is that the beginning and the end? Is it literally copy and paste, or this is a starting point? Rather than going, look here. Like, you know, I have just been sent you like a link. You know, like, how do I do the following things? Link. It's like, and that is what I'm getting at in terms of that managing of the expectation. And it's just, again, it's an empathy thing. What would you think if you had that kind of issue in a kind of field you weren't aware of, and someone just sent you a random part of the docs? And you're like, I mean, this is great, but again, it kind of goes into artificial complexity. I could then be looking around, so many paragraphs, like, okay, I think it's this. I'm like, oh no, it's like line 4, just do that. And it's the just do that I think is worth bearing in mind of how difficult that is.
Really, sort of extending that on to what I'm saying about people's knowledge. As someone that has to pass the information on sometimes, and I'm caught in meetings, and it's short lines, it's very easy to send somebody down a rabbit hole, but it's the wrong one. And they can just tie themselves in knots for you to come back to them later and go, oh no, I can't. So actually engaging with them and sort of starting the solution to something is quite important, that you don't false information.
That's absolutely right, because to you, and again, it's about realizing what's obvious for you, right? Like, yeah, it's like clearly that, and you're in a rush, you just want to get it sorted, you want to, and plus you want to help them as quickly as possible as well. Like, it's not a bad thing. There is, obviously I'm talking about it from a case of just being like some quick response, but that is because you want to help out your person who's in trouble, but that is the only time you can give them at that moment. But I would still argue that it's actually a better choice to still say, give me, like, I'll get back to you in half an hour, don't panic kind of thing. Or have like a code word if that's too long a sentence. So like every time you see the word Albuquerque, that's like, I'll get back to you. You know, like whatever works for you.
There's also a thing there is between like teaching a man to fish and giving them a fish.
Yeah.
And sometimes you fish on a fish.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you do want that whole lesson as well. It's about setting out what you want.
And sometimes it's really easy to answer it for them.
Yeah,
because you
yeah.
just know.
Yeah.
Whereas I try with my guys just to sort of throw them key pointers and let them go and sort of feel their way. And you know, if you stuck it out, come back and sit there and blank screen.
For sure.
I think the other thing is to learn how to manage your manager. Because
Yeah.
a lot of human and very few managers are really nasty. And it's just of all different ways and just getting used to taking the time to learn how someone operates and to get the best out of them. And also to try and make their life easier. And we'll get more out of them.
Yeah. I think while absolutely that has merit, the only thing I would add to that is the power dynamic, you know, of being aware, because, you know, the taken to a sense degree that can go into like victim blaming kind of stuff, you know, it's really important to appreciate that they are the manager, and you should, as the managee, do everything in your power to make their life easier, absolutely. But they are still the point of responsibility, and the buck has to stop with them for those kind of things. Does that make sense? It's not trying to like degrade that.
Yeah, to at least meet you halfway.
Exactly, compromise, man, absolutely so. Great, is there anything? Yes?
Hopefully, very quick one, might just be a straight no answer. Talk about sources of learning.
Yes.
Have you ever tried Pluralsight?
I have not an awful lot. I hear really, really good things about it though. That's my answer.
I haven't used that. I haven't used O'Reilly.
I mean, O'Reilly is all of the O'Reilly books. So every single O'Reilly book ever, you can just read. They are just there. And they have some video courses which I don't think are great, but like, or at least from my experience, but the books, the entirety of O'Reilly, if it's published on O'Reilly, you can read it on O'Reilly Learning, for example. I literally don't know how that impacts on publishers and authors and money and stuff like that. So maybe, I still think it's brilliant, but also buy books. Oh.
Just a comment I just wanted to say, because I'm very new to this industry and I'm sort of just like trying to learn and sort of everything. But it's really encouraging, even having this discussion of like sort of the empathy and it's like wanting to improve. It's just really like great and encouraging me to feel like I can be part of like this industry.
That is a wonderful thing. There'll be a feedback link. No, that is literally the point though.
Yeah.
Absolutely too, because again, lunches, so you can like go to that. But I mean, the point is about when we talk about getting people into STEM or we talk about getting people into stuff, you have to appreciate what you're asking them to get into, right? And it's about cultural shifts. And it's a no losers scenario. That's the whole thing. Like, good communication benefits everyone. It benefits both parties in manager-managee kind of scenarios. The empathy is only going to help. You know, and then it's about community building as well. I mean, again, while I'm talking about directly with the people you work with, it's good practice for how you treat your customer base in general. And yeah, so I'm really, really delighted to hear that. That's the whole point of everything. So, great. Thank you so much. Have a great lunchtime.